Hey guys. So when I started my channel, I began to unwind this spool of propaganda that I've been fed basically since birth. And this made me think about my public education, from kindergarten to my post-secondary education at Mizzou, and really evaluate what I had been taught and what I needed to unlearn. I remember being about 8 or 9 and saying to my mom, I don't understand why everyone says there are no differences in people. Some of us literally have different colored skin. Isn't that a difference? And then my mom said, don't let anyone hear you say that. This, of course, was sage advice from my mom. But it made me think that around 3rd grade or so, I had a pretty good understanding that I was being fed a load of bullshit about diversity in school because in their obsessive inclusion, they had completely failed to address any real differences that do exist between races and cultures. So like most publicly educated Americans, I was taught from birth that diversity is our strength and multiculturalism is the rock-solid foundation upon which our country was built. So when you're a young child, school is less of a directed effort in conditioning than it does later in your education. And it was more of a nebulous effort when I was growing up. Although I would imagine in these days, elementary schools have gone the way of colleges.
You will finger paint what we tell you. Go! Faster! Are you done? What is it? What have you done?
People of all colors and creeds holding hands beneath a rainbow!
Good!
But the diversity agenda became clear to me when reviewing my education in terms of what my reading curriculum was. So I read a fair amount of classics in high school, but my sister and my brother seemed to have gotten a much more robust education in this regard than I did at the same school, but just a few years ahead of me. And my curriculum, by the time I had gotten there, had absorbed a tremendous number of diversity reads in the place of much, much more important literature, like Shakespeare or the Greeks, which are difficult to read, and students need the help of teachers to achieve even basic comprehension. So students are not likely to be reading the Iliad on their own time, and it is essential that some of these things get read in school. My junior year, I took AP Lit, I want to say. I don't really remember. And we must have spent about a third of that semester just reading books with a racial agenda. We spent weeks on Native Son, which is about an impoverished, uneducated black man on the south side of Chicago in the 30s who murders this white, racially tolerant woman and then bludgeons his own girlfriend to death after raping her. And the takeaway from this book, and the reason that it was in our curriculum, is that Bigger Thomas, the main character, is ultimately meant to be seen as a victim of his environment and as the creation of white racism. We also read The Bluest Eye, and perhaps even Beloved, in that same semester. The Bluest Eye is about a poor black girl who is raped by her father and driven to insanity by this concept that there is only beauty in whiteness. And Toni Morrison, the author, has outright said that racism is largely a white problem, and get this, that the instruction for necessary reform can be found in the pages of her novels.
If you can only be tall because somebody's on their knees, then you have a serious problem. And my feeling is white people have a very, very serious problem. And they should start thinking about what they can do about it. Take me out of it.
Then give white people some free advice.
They're all in my books.
I'm not saying that certain books should be banned from school or even that they shouldn't be read. Just read everything. But 3 books in a single semester at a predominantly white school with the theme that white people have single-handedly caused all the problems in the black community, including crime, and about how white systemic racism has permanently, irredeemably destroyed an entire class of people. That's too much pandering, especially for an advanced lit class. I really just needed someone to help me through King Lear. I don't think we read any Shakespeare in that class. But it wasn't just the diversity agenda that seemed to be reinforced throughout my education. There also seemed to be an effort brewing to undermine Western tradition. I seemed to have a lot of repeat curriculum growing up, and one of the things that I read probably 3 times in my primary and secondary education was a short story by Shirley Jackson called The Lottery. So the gist of this is that in this small town, a lottery is held every year to choose a person from the town that is then stoned to death by the other townspeople. They are all practicing this tradition, but they don't really remember why or understand why. And every time I read this in school, there was a class discussion and an assignment on the dangers of blindly following tradition. There is truth to this, and this story may have been written as a reaction to the horrors of World War II and the dangers of collectivism. But with my school having a predominantly white Christian student body where the only traditions that were observed were pretty benign, why was this repeated at the same school in successive years of curriculum? It seems like a waste of time to me that could have been spent reading basically anything else. It is possible that my teachers were simply not reviewing curriculum from preceding years, but it is also possible, and I think more likely, that many of them were just idiot Marxists that been indoctrinated in their own college educations. So I don't think that a bunch of chick third grade teachers circled up and had a discussion about how to subvert Christian tradition in the educational system. But you know how liberals are, whether they do this subconsciously or not. I do have to be fair to Mizzou when I talk about my English education there, because I took the humanities sequence, which was a 4-semester class with excellent, exclusively Western curriculum, and that really was the series that I needed to have in high school to prepare me for college. But before the humanities sequence, I took some basic English class at Mizzou, which I think was probably what most freshmen took. And in this curriculum, even though it was just a semester, I was very troubled by it because it was experienced by many, many more students than the humanities curriculum. In this class, I did not read any classic literature. What we did read was more Marxist drivel, but this time with a little Latino flavor. There seemed to be a ton of Gabriel Garcia Marquez in the curriculum, who was a self-proclaimed socialist and a well-known personal friend of Fidel Castro. And my personal favorite waste of time in this class was the several weeks that we spent discussing the tortilla curtain, which is perhaps the most pandering piece of white guilt trash I have ever read, and written by this hipster cuck. In this book, a Mexican and his pregnant wife come into the United States illegally. They're homeless and camping at the bottom of an LA canyon. And one day, the Mexican guy gets hit by the car of a wealthy white man. They don't want to call the police, so the white guy just flips him $20 and is like, oh, he's just some Mexican. And then he sustains all of these injuries, so he can't work. And he has this poor pregnant wife named America, I shit you not. Then they're nearly starving, so they have to eat a house cat. Then this broad gives birth to her anchor baby, who turns out to be blind. Then there's a landslide. I swear to God, a landslide. And the blind anchor baby drowns. For fuck's sake, how emotionally manipulative is that, for real? If this were the typical experience of your average Jose, he would not be illegally sneaking over the border with his very pregnant wife to try to get citizenship for their unborn child. What tripe. So seemingly, my professor read this book and made the decision that it is more important for your average freshman to read this than anything else. It also means that Mizzou administration looked over the syllabus and approved all of this. It is clear that liberalism has seeped into and completely polluted the public education system in the United States, and that it is starting from a very young age and being continued all the way through college. But I think that people are rejecting this kind of education that is empty and void of critical thinking, as is evidenced by Mizzou's extreme decline in enrollment in 2016. So I will leave you with this. The great literary critic Harold Bloom said, quote, "The world gets older without getting either better or worse, and so does literature. But I do think that the drab current phenomenon that passes for literary studies in the university will finally provide its own corrective." So let's hope that he was right. Thanks. I'll see you soon. Bye.